966.
Yeah, inshallah, they get this, Richard.
Inshallah. We'll see in November. Yet another story to follow.
Indeed. Richard, my one big thing this week. So in the Sustig News Review last Thursday or Friday, I probably should have written that down before starting this. I think it was Friday, but the New York Times featured an interview last week, and it was called "What It's Like to Be a Female Tour Guide in Saudi Arabia." And it was, an interview style piece with Fatima Al-Zimam, who introduced visitors from around the world to her country, opened up her own business as a tourist guide. And as the NYT article says, she discusses her favorite sites, driving a pickup truck around, and how her country is changing. And this piece is worth reading. It's kind of an easy read because it's so it's very casual, and it's a Q&A format. It's just like kind of cool and refreshing. But just sort of reading it, Richard, I thought in the moment just how much progress we're seeing in just a few years for Saudi women. It feels cliche to say that now, but it's still striking nonetheless. And just seeing this article and the scene presented here by this article in the paper of record for the United States, and some would argue the world, the New York Times, in my opinion, second to none. It's a Saudi woman, a female entrepreneur in the tourism space, which didn't even exist, giving an interview on the record, getting her picture taken, showing herself driving her truck, talking about her business, the reforms going on in Saudi Arabia, Al-Ula. It just, I just sort of was struck by this whole, the look of this piece, how things have really changed. So, and we've had, Richard, the enormous fortune to speak with some really dynamic and ultra capable women on the 966. Last week, of course, Dana Al-Ajlani, who was just terrific. Please go back and listen to that if you have not. Just awesome. A wonderful conversation, just terrific. And Richard, we've had recently as well, Saudi female entrepreneur Sarah bin Laden and Renata Jeffrey. And Richard, we had a lot of Saudi women. I went back and sort of looked at it, and we've had a lot of Saudi women on this program. Gada Al-Harthi from Barker Langham, Day Al-Daiwan, Center for Development of Urban Design and Planning for Saudi Cities, Fatima Al-Hamlan, who's a terrific consultant at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center, Dr. Doa Al-Salah from Mount Sinai, Raghat Fatadeen, Reem Philby, Lina Al-Maina, May Al-Mozani. And just kind of thinking about it, we've had just some really impressive guests, Saudi female guests on this program. Obviously, just a tiny fraction of the larger number of Saudi women out there that are exceptional professionals and human beings. And so just reading that article got me thinking about just the amount of progress in the last 5 or 6 years. We really are seeing real results of the reforms included as part of Vision 2030. And those are positive liberal reforms that are empowering Saudi women. Not all at once. They weren't enacted, in 2016, 2017. They sort of gradually phased in, but with a steady tempo that kind of indicated where the ship was heading eventually. And that has caused some cultural and societal shifts as well. And there are many from significant to just noteworthy, but lifting the ban on women driving, outlawing gender discrimination in the workforce, mandating equal wages, retirement ages, forbidding the dismissal of women from jobs for maternity reasons, criminalizing sexual harassment, loosening the dress code in Saudi Arabia. All of these things, Richard, just started coming in one after the other and really giving women a chance to enter the workforce, and have had a knock-on effect socially as well. Things like unmarried women and men are now allowed to mix together and network together in public. We take those things for granted here in the West, but to have that now means it's a real possibility for Saudi women to network and, explore new job opportunities. And Richard, it's really kind of amazing because women employees made up around 37% now of the labor market in Saudi Arabia in 2022. The number of female Saudis working in the kingdom's private sector, surpassed 900,000 for the first time in May of this year. That's a pretty steady and solid increase. In 2019, for example, women made up 26% of the Saudi workforce, 20% in 2018, and 17.6% in 2017. And I'm going to borrow a little bit of data here from a late 2022 piece from the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington by Susan Saikali. And she writes, by the first quarter of 2022, 39% of Saudi women in the private sector held senior and middle management positions. As of March of 2022. About 27.7% of women were working in the education sector and 17.7% in the retail and wholesale sectors. Now, of course, Richard, sort of 6 years on into Vision 2030, it's called that because there are expectations of goals being hit by 2030. We have a little time to go, and there is a lot of work left to do for Saudi women, increasingly putting women in the highest positions across the public and private sector. We can expect more progress here. Princess Rima is probably the most popular example, but you also have, and Richard, I got a long list here. I'm going to go through a few of these. There's no way to list them all without this becoming a Amazon audiobook instead of a podcast, but just a few. I mean, Sarah Al Suhaimi, first Saudi woman to chair the Saudi Arabian Stock Exchange, the first female board member of the Saudi Central Bank, Shaila Al Rawali. Sorry about the butchering of that. Rania Barnawi, a stem cell researcher, became the first woman from the kingdom to go to space. We discussed that recently as well. Michelle Al-Shamari is the first aerospace engineer woman in the GCC and the first Saudi woman to join NASA. Oh man, there's so many here. Another example, not just in the private sector business, but Al-Nud Al-Ansari became the first Saudi female referee to receive the international badge from FIFA. Anyway, so there's all these firsts coming in. It seems like once a week there's some new first, some new glass ceiling being shattered in Saudi Arabia. And so we keep hearing about that, but it's interesting to see the data behind it showing, yeah, indeed, women are entering the workforces. They are taking new jobs and moving around and have some mobility. So this is just, I mean, it was just kind of like, I saw this and I was like, whoa, this article in the New York Times. I was like, New York Times, Saudi woman driving a truck, running her own business, talking about tourism. Just, it's kind of worth taking stock and saying, wow, like, so this, things are actually changing. It is cliche basically on this podcast to say that, Richard. We talk about it a lot, but it's just kind of cool to think about.
Yeah, it's and it is a fun article to read. I thought, I mean, two things initially. You may recall when I came back and raved on about my visit to Alula. One of the things I talked about was the guides and the setup and how you could do it, and they were predominantly women. A lot of the women who had been educated in the local university there, and they were all capable, all very good, all extremely comfortable, outgoing, engaging. It was a great opportunity for them to be employed gainfully in an interesting job, right in their hometown. They didn't have to go to Riyadh for this, which turns back to Mrs. Imam in the New York Times article. I mean, she can do this job now because there's tourism. All these offshoots. The other thing that comes to mind, and I think it's important that the sort of marquee names for women who are in prominent posts and this sort of thing, are recognized. Like you listed a number of them, and there's so many more. We know there's so many capable women in Saudi Arabia. But the next goal, I think, for people like Dana Al-Ajlani and the Women in Business Committee with the AmCham KOSA is to position more and more women systemically. So when you go for a CEO or a president or a managing director or whatever, they're in that middle management, are really capable, seasoned, experienced women, that have done it and can do it and can move on up. And that's when you start, we'll see success. I think we'll feel a true success and a real turning of the ship, even though obviously we know it's made directional changes moving forward in a positive way. When a woman is named to a senior C-suite position and nobody mentions it, it goes unnoticed because it's a regular thing. And that's always, that'll be an interesting litmus test. And finally, I think we've done a lot of good things at the 966. I think it's a format. It's unique. Nobody else is doing it. I think we add real value to the conversation. It's something we're trying to do. Obviously, I don't think anybody has sort of put forward more young Saudis, in particular women, than we have. We've platformed people that you wouldn't know if you were a listener, you would never have heard of. And not only would you have never heard of, when you get to hear them, they're really interesting, doing, fascinating, meaningful, purposeful things. So that's one thing I'm particularly proud of at the 966 is that we've platformed these kind of people.
Yeah, Richard, and I'm glad you mentioned, just you said a couple of really good things there. But the first one, just wanted to note, you know, to move for Saudi Arabia to move to the point where a Saudi woman achieves a high position of prominence, and it's not really mentioned that she is a woman. It's just like she's the appointee, she's the person who got hired, and the fact that it's a woman is irrelevant. It's just that's who the most qualified person is, and that's the end of the conversation. That's a goal to be reached, and I think it's achievable definitely within the next 7 years. But I feel like we will always be sort of viewing it through this lens of, because we're watching the Saudi women kind of catch up with the progress. That's what we'll see. I should note, Richard, like, you know, we're both obviously American. 10% of the Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. are head by women. So
Yeah,
we're far from being in a position to lecture in this regard. So,
and yeah, 100%. I mean, it's always good to remember. It's always good to remember 2018. That's when women are allowed to drive.
mm-hmm.
And then you had a cascade of other liberating legislation or decisions that gave women more power over their lives and their families. But it's very recent stuff. So when we talk about it, it's really trying to put a pin in it and say, this is where we are now. This is where it's headed. And it is fun when as you say, when, an NYT article that is not, you read the article and it's just a celebration. It's just, I came and I met this woman who was really cool. She's doing all this neat stuff. It wasn't, I don't know. It was kind of reporting as it should be. It was reporting of the situation. It didn't have a lot of context in terms of, uh, there wasn't a lot of meaning attached to the report. It was like, I went there, this was cool, she's doing neat things.